Good evening. A Tory Prime Minister who says he doesn't want an election, but in the next hour or so is about to try to get one. A Labour leader who's been asking for an election virtually every day for the last 2 years, now saying he won't vote for one. Welcome to British politics as we head into another extraordinary evening. Opposition MPs are trying to rush through legislation which will outlaw a no-deal Brexit, supported of course by 21 rebel Tory MPs, some of whom in a very modern night of the long knives had the whip taken away from them by text. Normal rules do not seem to apply. At his first Prime Minister's questions, age-old conventions were broken. Mr Johnson swore about, if not at, the opposition benches, the bitter divisions across the House on full display.
What is the slogan? What do we want? What do we want? Dither and delay. When do we want it? We don't know.
I really fail to see how I can be accused of undermining negotiations, because no negotiations are taking place.
As the anti-no deal bill hurtles through the Commons, just an hour ago another defeat for the government and another Tory rebel as the former chairwoman of the Conservative Party, Caroline Spelman, joins the 21 but is not thrown out of the party. And as the Chancellor tried to deliver his spending review, this from an irate Speaker.
The Right Honourable Gentleman, in the course of a statement, seems to be veering into matters out with, not even tangential, but unrelated to the spending round.
And huge anger too, directed at the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Dominic Cummings, even from his own side, for the way he has behaved towards One Nation Conservatives.
And here in Brussels, they are deeply perplexed by what the Le Monde newspaper described as another mad day in Brexit land. And even if there were any concessions they were prepared to make here, no one in Brussels believes they would survive the votes in Parliament. And then there is the state of the intense negotiations about a new deal touted by the Prime Minister. David Frost, Matt Farr, Channel 4 News. Are these negotiations a sham? Have you actually got something in that bag of yours? What is the point of these negotiations if you've actually got nothing to propose? Boris Johnson says, as he still maintains, that there are intense negotiations.
There's no negotiations.
So tonight, MPs have seized control of the Commons agenda, and right now they are in the midst of debating and voting on a bill to block any chance of a no-deal Brexit on October 31st. Boris Johnson says he won't ask Brussels for a delay and he won't resign to trigger an October election. But if the opposition forces the bill through the Commons tonight, he will ask MPs to vote for just that. And he's accused Jeremy Corbyn of being frit and chicken after Labour said they wouldn't support an election unless there was no chance of no deal. Rarely has there been a day quite like this in Westminster. Our political editor Gary Gibbon is with me now. We seem to say that every day, Gary.
We do. Every day seems more extraordinary than the last, precedent broken even more. What's happening in there at the moment is that MPs are voting on amendments to that bill that has come from the opposition parties with Tory rebels, which would compel Boris Johnson, if he was Prime Minister, to seek a Brexit delay. That's what he's calling the surrender bill. These amendments, none of them are expected to pass, so the bill is expected to pass through the Commons intact and go to the House of Lords. What Boris Johnson is expected to do when this bill finishes here tonight is come to the House of Commons and ask for an early general election. And not only does it seem that the opposition parties aren't ready to help him out with that, they want to nail down the no-deal bill before that happens, and maybe nail down some other things. But there's quite a few Tory MPs, it seems, who aren't ready to back him on that. So yet again, he's going to be frustrated, and he could be in this extraordinary position where he's almost a sort of zombie Prime Minister. He can't go one way, he can't go the other, and he's being spoon-fed policies by a House of Commons which is in opposition to him and which he doesn't want to implement. It's an extraordinary set of circumstances. He's just been talking to Tory MPs. You were talking about some of the anger that there's been about the deselections that happened yesterday. There was a bit of booing when one Tory MP at the meeting tried to say that had been a good idea. Boris Johnson, perhaps a tad disingenuously, said he couldn't do anything about that because that might undermine the Chief Whip. I think most people think the decision came from number 10, not the Chief Whip, and not just number 10, but maybe even that aide you were talking about, Dominic Cummings. That, when he was asked about him, Boris Johnson said, "Oh, don't pick on the advisor. I am Dominic Cummings in a latex mask. We are one of the same, but I'm the guy in charge." It has been an extraordinary day, a day, I have to say, where there has been an awful lot of really quite bad language flying around. There was some flying around yesterday as well, not least, it seems, from Dominic Cummings. Some even used potty language by the Prime Minister in his first ever Prime Minister's Question Time. But I can reassure you there's none of it in this report.
The ayes to the right, 329. The noes to the left, 300.
The bill trying to tie the Prime Minister's hands and force his signature on a request for a Brexit delay cleared its first hurdle in the Commons 2 hours ago. Boris Johnson's attempts to stop this moment happening at all failed last night. And those rebels he punished by throwing them out of the party today mocked him and others with much longer records of revolt.
And indeed, I voted for the withdrawal agreement on every occasion it has been presented to the House, which is more than can be said for my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, the Leader of the House and other members of the Cabinet whose serial disloyalty has been such an inspiration to so many of us. Mr. Speaker.
They laughed together and sat together, a chunk of the Tory establishment now in exile. The former Chancellor said Boris Johnson had conducted a mass purge, but he had to rebel because he'd seen the full horror of what no deal would mean, and there was no attempt at negotiations really going on.
Because actually there is no negotiation going on with the EU. We've had confirmation from multiple sources across the European Union that nothing is happening, confirmation from within government that nothing is happening.
Straight after the bill demanding a Brexit delay is passed, Boris Johnson plans to call a vote on an October election. By law, 2/3 of MPs are needed for that to pass, and he won't get that. Opposition parties are withholding support until they're sure a no-deal Brexit is completely ruled out. In his first Prime Minister's Question Time, Boris Johnson accused Jeremy Corbyn of being chicken.
I really don't see how, with a straight face, the right honourable gentleman can accuse anybody of being unwilling to stand up to scrutiny when he will not agree. He will not agree to submit his surrender bill to the verdict of the people in an election. He's frightened.
Yesterday, he lost one vote, his first vote in Parliament, and he now wants to dissolve Parliament. He's desperate, absolutely desperate, to avoid scrutiny.
Call an election, you great big girl's blouse, he said. One of those thrown out of the Tory party yesterday said Jeremy Corbyn was right to suspect Boris Johnson might be trying to trick the opposition into an election that allows no deal to happen by sleight of hand.
All sorts of shenanigans are going on. It's very difficult. I mean, remember, Boris Johnson said in writing to us, the One Nation, that he wouldn't prorogue Parliament.
Your advice to Labour would be this could be a trap.
Yeah, I think that they are absolutely determined, do or die, to get to the 31st of October, and they'll do anything they can. So I wouldn't give them an inch.
Can you think of an occasion when Boris Johnson's been honest?
I'm sure I can. Let me think. I'm sure I can, Gary. You've put me on the spot there. But that is an embarrassing question, and I will think hard.
I think at least 2/3 of Labour MPs would agree that handing power to Boris Johnson to set the date of an election is not a good idea at this stage, because he's proven over and over again that the interests of the Tory party come before the interests of the country.
Dominic Cummings, the Prime Minister's chief strategist, accompanied Boris Johnson to the Commons today. Former Business Secretary Greg Clark has told friends Mr Cummings was sweary and abrupt with him when he was seeking a compromise approach yesterday afternoon.
I don't see how Mr Johnson can retain his credibility unless he deals with this issue. It is abhorrent. It shouldn't have happened. It's not the first time. Man has established a reputation as a bully, We don't allow that in Parliament. So either he goes or the Prime Minister's reputation is damaged, and the Prime Minister needs to understand that.
Advisers advise, ministers decide. Can I ask the Prime Minister to bear that statement closely in mind in relation to his own chief adviser, Dominic Cummings?
Be in no doubt that we are deciding on a policy to take this country forward, not backwards, as he would do.
One Labour MP seized the moment to attack the Prime Minister for past comments he said stirred race crimes, including his newspaper reference to Muslim niqabs as letterboxes.
When will the Prime Minister finally apologise for his derogatory and racist remarks, racist remarks, Mr. Speaker, which have led to a spike in hate crime?
Order. Can I just say to the honourable gentleman that if he took the trouble to read the article in question, he would see that it was a strong Liberal defence, as he began his question by saying, of everybody's right to wear whatever they want in this country.
The image of Jacob Rees-Mogg lounging on the front bench at yesterday's debate became a Twitter phenomenon overnight. But the names dominating talk amongst Tory MPs today were the MPs who were thrown out of the party last night, some of them still reeling from how they'd been treated.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not standing at the next election, and I am thus approaching the end of 37 years' service to this House, of which I have been proud and honoured beyond words to be a member. I'm truly very sad that it should end in this way.
My sleeping arrangements, highly sophisticated.
A Lib Dem peer getting his bedding ready tonight for what's expected to be a long battle to make sure the bill delaying Brexit gets time to be debated in the House of Lords. Pro-Remain peers are in the majority here, but pro-Brexit peers intend to create every obstacle they possibly can.
Well, one of the Tory rebels who had the whip withdrawn last night is David Gauke, and he's with me now. You've got to hand it to Mr Johnson. He said you'd lose the whip, you'd face deselection, and he's done it. He's been decisive.
Well, that's true. He said he was going to do that, but if anything, that strengthened the determination of a number of my colleagues to vote with their conscience and vote in the way that they felt was best in the national interest. And if that was a technique that was designed to try to win a vote, well, he lost very comfortably last night.
How were you told?
I got a voicemail message. I was travelling home and on the underground, and once I got sort of overground, I looked at my phone and there was a voicemail message from the Chief Whip.
And you knew it was all over?
Well, I was expecting it, and I knew that others had also had that phone call, and to be fair, we were told in advance, or at least we saw it in the press, that we were going to have the whip withdrawn, and but nonetheless, I don't think that really put anybody off.
I mean, Boris Johnson said voting against the government would undermine him, would undermine what the government is trying to do in terms of negotiations with the EU. It's perfectly reasonable in those circumstances to withdraw the whip.
Well, a lot of people voted against the whip when Theresa May was Prime Minister. That certainly didn't help her negotiations. And one of those people was Boris Johnson, of course, now leader of the Conservative Party. But look, in reality, this idea that the issue is about Parliament and that's what's standing in the way of getting a deal. The problem is the government hasn't got a plan that they've presented to the European Union. They haven't got a workable plan to deal with the Irish backstop issue, and they've held back from putting that plan forward because they know it'll be dismissed.
So when they say negotiations are going well, that they have put forward a decent replacement for the backstop, you don't believe them?
Well, I and a number of Conservative MPs yesterday met with the Prime Minister and indeed his chief negotiator, and we were told two things. One, that they hadn't put a plan forward, and two, the reason they hadn't put the plan forward now was because if they did, they know it would be rejected.
Where does that leave you?
Well, the fact is that if Parliament doesn't intervene, as I believe it must do, we will leave without a deal on the 31st of October. We will crash out to the enormous detriment to the British people. So that's why Parliament has to intervene. We have to get this legislation through and we have to implement it.
Part of the difficulty for you and the other opposition MPs is that you don't offer an alternative other than a delay.
Well, at the moment, we are destined to crashing out on the 31st of October.
And do you think that's Boris Johnson's preferred option, in truth?
I don't know whether it's his preferred option. I think probably he would like to get a deal, but it's all very well wanting to get a deal. You've got to want the means as well, and he's not doing that. He doesn't have a coherent plan. He doesn't have a proposal of how he is going to reach an agreement with the European Union. There isn't a credible, workable solution to the issue that he's identified, which is the backstop.
But where does that leave the Tory party? People like you, some dismissed by text, some lucky enough to get a voicemail. A Conservative Party that now doesn't have a place for Sir Nicholas Soames and Kenneth Clarke, 100 years of service to your party between them. What do you feel about that?
I think the Conservative Party is in its worst crisis in its history. And the challenge that we face, or the Conservative Party faces, that it is turning its back on moderate, pragmatic, pro-business voices who have voted Conservative, perhaps all their lives. And if the Conservative Party is saying it doesn't have a place for Kenneth Clarke, Nicholas Soames, Philip Hammond, Rory Stewart, then it doesn't have a place for those people who vote Conservative because they admire the likes of Ken Clarke and Philip Hammond
Lots
and so on.
of criticism today about the Chief of Staff, Dominic Cummings. Boris Johnson said, there's no division, I am in charge. Who do you think is behind pushing people like you out effectively? Is it Boris Johnson or is it Dominic Cummings?
Well, the whole style of everything that the government is doing, whether it's suspending Parliament, whether it's the brazen way in which they deny the reason why they have suspended Parliament, whether...
Brazen or lying?
Well, I'll use my word, but brazen. The way that they have failed to confirm that they would abide by the law, and this massive overreaction of withdrawing the whip from 21 Conservative MPs, it has all the hallmarks of the way that Dominic Cummings operates. He is a figure who is out of control, and I'm afraid Boris Johnson isn't standing up and showing the leadership. He's allowing a functionary, an unelected bureaucrat, to run this country.
So we saw Philip Lee cross the floor of the House yesterday. We know Jo Swinson from the Liberal Democrats says she has been talking to partyless people like yourself. Has she spoken to you? Would you be listening?
I've had lots of conversations with many people in lots of parties, including Jo Swinson.
Would you be interested in moving?
I'm a Conservative, and I would like
You're
to
an
stand...
independent at the moment.
I'm still a Conservative as far as I'm concerned, but what I do want is a good government after the next general election, which I guess is imminent, and I am deeply concerned about the direction the Conservative Party is going, and I worry that at the moment the Conservative Party doesn't look fit to be in government.
David Gauke, thank you very much for talking to us today. Well, how is all this going down in Europe? Matt is in Brussels.
Thanks, Jackie. Well, Gary mentioned some bad language there in London. Well, I'm afraid there's been a little bit of that here too in Brussels. But first things first, in Brussels today, Britain's Brexit envoy, David Frost, was in town for technical talks with his EU counterparts to see whether any progress can be made. Now remember, the Prime Minister keeps insisting that the talks are intense and that they're yielding progress with new proposals on the table. This is a key part of his political strategy to Parliament, to the British public, and of course to the EU. So how's that going? How realistic are these claims? Well, I caught up with David Frost as he walked into those technical talks, and a warning: this piece also contains some strong language. This is not a statue depicting the current state of the British government, or the EU, or Brexit, but it might as well be. The path to the unknown is paved with spin, and the spin from number 10 is that the negotiations behind these inscrutable slats of the Commission are going gangbusters, as the Prime Minister might say. Well, today we caught up with David Frost, our Michel Barnier, the former diplomat once drafted in to clean up the whiskey lobby. David Frost, Matt Frye, Channel 4 News. Are these negotiations a sham? Have you actually got something in that bag of yours? How big is your team now? Mr. Frost, can you answer a few questions? What is the point of these negotiations if you've actually got nothing to propose? The Commission says you've got nothing new on the table. When will you put something on the table? Mr. Frost. Are you just going through the motions, Mr. Frost? Can you please give us an answer? Mr. Frost, what is the point of you coming here if you've got nothing to say? Even by the Trappist standards of special advisers, this was remarkable self-discipline. By comparison, the real Michel Barnier was positively verbose.
Mr. Barnier, any progress in the talks?
Still at work. Still at work.
Mr. Barnier,
No, it's okay. I don't want to make any comments. Still at work.
Anything new from the
I'm
UK
still at
side
work.
today?
Next attempt at enlightenment about the state of these negotiations, speak to a senior MEP on the Brexit steering group. When Boris Johnson says, as he still maintains, that there are intense negotiations going on.
That's bullshit. There's no negotiations. There's no negotiations simply because the British position is to say we don't want the backstop and we don't want the backstop. Counter-proposal? Nothing. So basically they say, come back with something that pleases us. That's not a negotiation, so they are not negotiating.
So when he is saying that there are intense negotiations going on and that they're making progress, is that a lie?
I think it's a lie. It's not because, well, you send a couple of people to Brussels to sip coffee together that you have negotiations. Negotiations is putting options on the table, negotiating the details and trying to forge agreement. He's not interested in an agreement. What he's interested in is giving the illusion that he negotiates in good faith with bad people. And that ultimately, if there's disorder, if there's disruption because of no-deal Brexit, well, you know, I tried, but these bloody Europeans can't really negotiate.
When you look at the politics in London, are you filled with despair or hope at the moment?
Well, rather hope, actually, because there's clarification within the Tory party. Now we know that this has become an English nationalist party, a Brexit party, not really better than Farage's party.
Is that the way you see it?
Yeah, exactly. So there's a clarification. English nationalist party, they claim to be, well, to defend the United Kingdom in all its parts, etc. This is rubbish. They are not. They are English nationalists, and they want hard Brexit. They want a no-deal Brexit to happen.
And in Brussels, they're fully expecting a no deal and throwing money and resources at the problem, even making the union's emergency funds available.
We have announced that we are ready to consider financial support to member states to cushion the effects of a no-deal Brexit, taking into account the available funding that is there at the EU level. So we have looked at that, and now, in order to be fully ready for an eventual no-deal Brexit, we have made the necessary legislative proposals. Better safe than sorry.
In other words, when you've prepared for the worst-case scenario, the threat of bringing it about loses its sting. Well, in that building just behind me, the European Parliament, there is the meeting of the Brexit steering group, briefed by Michel Barnier, the chief negotiator. And as he walked into that meeting, which I think might still be going on or is just about to end, I had a quick word with him.
After my meeting with the member states, now the Parliament, still at work, and I just want to tell you that the EU will remain in any circumstances vigilant, united and calm. Thank you.
That was Michel Barnier. Well, here I'm joined now by the Vice President of the European Parliament and German MEP Katharina Barley, who served until recently as Justice Minister in the Berlin government. Thanks for coming on the programme. Now, you're not actually just German, you are Anglo-German, hence Barley. What do you make of what you see in London at the moment?
Well, you always think it can't become any worse, and it does. I mean, we see the language becoming more and more aggressive, but no new proposals being on the table. So we here are waiting anxiously how this development is going to end.
So when you hear language like surrender and victory, I mean, you know, evoking the kind of the days of the Second World War, which plays quite well amongst some Tory party members, as an Anglo-German, what do you make of that?
Well, it's of course playing with the fears and with the prejudices that people have, and I'm very, very worried because this is actually what Europe is about: that people and peoples come together and meet on the same level. And if you risk this peaceful this common sense that we have had just for national or even party political interests. I find that very, very disturbing.
Do you find it offensive as well?
Well, yes, being German and British, I do find it offensive because it is not anything that the rest of Europe has provoked, or it's a British decision which we respect, but we also respect our decisions. We expect that to be respected.
And if the negotiations don't go anywhere, if there is a no-deal Brexit, if there are negative repercussions, do you expect the government in London to fully blame the European Union and indeed Europeans?
I mean, that has been the strategy from the very beginning, to do whatever they want, but the scapegoat in the end is always the European Union. We can do whatever we want at the moment. We will be the guilty ones for Boris Johnson and some others, and that is really a dangerous game. I'm very, very worried indeed.
Boris Johnson is convinced, as are many members of his government and his party, that because the German economy, an export economy, is having some problems at the moment, is teetering on the edge of recession, that you would be vulnerable to the threat of a no-deal Brexit because it would have an impact on the German economy, and therefore you might be in a position to give certain concessions to the British government. Is that a realistic strategy?
Brexit will have an impact on all our economies. A no-deal Brexit would have an even harder impact on all our economies, but it's the exact opposite of what Johnson is expecting.
Why?
Because the more you put pressure on the European Union, economically or politically, the more you have to stay together as the 27 remaining. Because it's not only about the relationship between Britain and the European Union. It's about the existence of the European Union. So we have to stick together, and we will.
In other words, if you cut the Brits a cake-and-eat-it deal, a bespoke deal, you're afraid that other countries might want to do the same?
Well, yes, not the ones that a lot of people are talking about, not Poland or Hungary, but countries like the Netherlands or Denmark or whoever.
But a club that is so insecure about its own togetherness is perhaps not a very healthy club, you could say.
Well, I mean, we're 28 still, very, very different countries, and that's fine. I mean, that's part of our strength. But of course, the interests are different too, and they're the ones who pay more, they're the ones that receive more, but we have a common goal and we have common values, and we have the same values as the British have, I hope. So it would be better to build bridges than to act aggressively against each other.
Katerina Barley, thank you very much indeed. Okay, so back to you, Jackie, in London. More from me later.
Thanks, Matt. Well, away from the heated scenes on the floor of the House, in a committee room down the corridor, experts from the government, freight and food industry have been giving a distinctly sober assessment of the impact of no deal. One of them warned that the end of October was actually one of the worst times to face a no-deal Brexit. And an internal document reissued by Kent County Council last week also warns of the high risk of more than 3 months of disruption. Our political correspondent Paul McNamara reports.
MPs may be trying to kill no deal, but the effect it might have continues to overshadow our ports, our economy and our parliament today yet again.
Which foodstuffs are not going to be available, which medicines are not going to be supplied, and what will happen to the shortages of vital supplies in every one of our hospitals all over this country.
Prime Minister! Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid that the Right Honourable Gentleman is guilty of the most shameless scaremongering. We have made ample preparations.
Ample preparations, the Prime Minister's words for what's going on to manage no-deal Brexit. That's easy for him to say in the front benches of the Commons, but in Kent, the county on the front lines of dealing with no deal, it doesn't look so good. This internal document, issued in the last 2 weeks and obtained by Channel 4 News, details the worst case effects on the vital roads around the nation's busiest port, Dover. The verdict? Months of severe disruption.
The briefing paper was reissued by Kent County Council's no-deal Brexit team, outlining plans for managing queues that may build to 10 to 12,000 vehicles with exceptionally high volumes of traffic that may be significantly disrupted. And the report includes what it described as a new risk of prolonged disruption to freight crossing the Channel that could last more than 3 months. The chance of it happening despite the plans in place? Very high. It's a warning the freight industry says has to be taken seriously, because delays on the roads here mean supply issues across the whole of the UK.
Isn't this all just Project Fear?
No, it's not Project Fear. We know what it takes to keep this country supplied. So believe us, this is going to be difficult. We're doing our best to cope, but at least take these concerns seriously.
James Hookham was giving evidence to the Brexit committee today, a committee that was particularly interested in a report on Operation Yellowhammer. It warned of possible food, water and medical shortages, but the government claimed it was the worst case scenario.
Do you think that is correct, that Yellowhammer is the worst case?
Yellowhammer was all based on the reasonable worst case. So, there's an unreasonable worst case, which would be even worse than Yellowhammer.
For us, the end of October is probably the worst time to face a no-deal Brexit.
Kent County Council say they have plans in place to mitigate the risk of no-deal Brexit. But yesterday, the government announced a further £20 million to prepare Kent's transport network. How successful will these preparations be? MPs trying to block no-deal Brexit hope we'll never find out.
And that was Paul McNamara. Now, the House of Lords could be in for a marathon session with some 200 amendments to vote on, as government supporters launch a filibuster operation to stop the bill aimed at preventing no deal from getting through. Some peers turned up today armed with duvets and suitcases of overnight supplies. Well, I'm joined now by the Labour peer, Peter Mandelson, who's in Westminster. Lord Mandelson, have you packed your duvet?
Not yet, but I'm sending out a search party.
You think you'll need it?
Yes, almost certainly. The people who are trying to defeat this bill have tabled well over 100 amendments simply to the business motion, to the programme motion. That's before we even get to the bill itself. And what they're doing is using every procedural device to sort of soak up the time that is available for us to consider first the business motion and then later on tomorrow the bill itself. They're not winning, by the way, the arguments, and they're not winning the votes. We have numbers on our side, but they have a lot of procedural gerrymandering at their disposal, and they're playing a very, very hard game.
And can they succeed at the end of the day?
Well, I mean, there are many of us who are prepared to go through the night, go through tomorrow, and if necessary, go through the weekend. I don't know. I mean, the House of Lords is a curious sort of voluntary, self-regulating body. I mean, we can push forward and we can get closure motion when filibustering is going on. But, we're talking about well over 100 amendments now. Each requires 2 votes. A vote to conclude the discussion of whatever amendment is being considered, and then to vote on the amendment itself. It soaks up an enormous amount of time.
Right. Now, your friend Tony Blair said the other day that a snap election at the moment is a trap set by Boris Johnson for the Labour Party, for Jeremy Corbyn. And he was urging him not to fall into that trap. What would you tell Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, I have a very similar view. I mean, nobody's afraid of a general election. I mean, all of us in the Labour Party want to have a general election, and indeed a government without a majority like this one can't endure indefinitely without one. But just as we don't fear an election, nor do we trust Boris Johnson. We think that he will manipulate the timing and the circumstances around an election in order to frustrate what all the rest of us are doing to prevent a no-deal Brexit, and to allow, therefore, a general election to get in the way, to be used by him in order to outflank public opinion and parliamentary opinion in that way, would be a very, very bad idea. So if we're going to have a general election, we should be thinking about that after October the 31st, not before.
Right, but you've had your differences with Jeremy Corbyn. Are you happy, would you be happy to see him as Prime Minister?
Of course I want a Labour government. I mean, as it happens, as a member of the House of Lords, I don't personally have a vote in a general election, but I'll be working to return Labour MPs at that election, because I know that that's the only way definitively to stop Boris Johnson and his colleagues taking Britain out of the European Union without any sort of trade deal. And just imagine what that would mean. It would mean an end overnight of our enforceable rights to trade in that vast European single market. It would throw businesses that operate and trade in Europe into complete legal uncertainty. But also it would rupture our relations with our European partners, with whom...
But you didn't say you'd be happy to see him as Prime Minister.
In coming years, we are going to have to negotiate some sort of future trade arrangement should we leave the European Union. So at every level, leaving without a deal would be a disaster for the country. And that's why it's very important that all of us do everything we can to block it, and don't allow Boris Johnson the opportunity to use a general election, as I say, in order to outflank Parliament's wishes.
Okay. All right, got to leave it there. Lord Mandelson, thank you very much indeed. Jackie, back to you.
Well, just when you thought things couldn't get even more absurd, a key amendment just seems to have passed by accident. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, joins us now. It might not be a fair question, but what's happened?
I don't think it's necessarily an accident that has happened. Under the obscure procedural rules that everybody's becoming more acquainted with in this space, if you haven't put up tellers, the people who count the MPs going through, against an amendment, the division is called off and the amendment goes in to the bill. Now, the amendment that has just, we think, gone into the bill is one which supporters of the bill were very clear was an amendment that would kill the bill. So I think what's happened is that the people strategizing in Downing Street have pulled a fast one, a rather clever one, and the other side are having to think very fast how on earth they save this phenomenal bill, which they couldn't believe their luck was sort of sailing out of harbour and into the open sea. It is possible that something quite significant just happened, but I think there are great procedural brains working on the opposition side to see if they can undo that.
Because the amendment was from a group of about 17 Labour MPs.
It was an amendment, as it happens, that was trying to effectively bring back not just Theresa May's deal, but the bits of it that were fine-tuned in talks with the Labour front bench. Now, an awful lot of people in the Labour leadership were saying, oh, don't be so daft, you can't put that there, please go away. But while they were doing that, it looks as though the government had a rather clever ploy in hand, and that there was a way of putting it in, not because they necessarily wanted as policy, but because it was a great way of scotching the other side's efforts. We are literally just reeling from this and trying to work out whether it is what we think, very significant, or whether it can be undone maybe perhaps even
because
in the Lords.
If it is what we think it might be, in very simple terms, what does that mean?
Well, it could mean potentially that the government has torpedoed the bill, but it might be that it can be unpicked at another stage. But of course, time is incredibly short. We were talking about the Lords' procedures being just getting underway today to try to create time for this whole thing to be considered in the Lords. I'm afraid I don't know the answer to your question.
Gary, that's fair enough, I think, in the circumstances. Thank you very, very much. Well, the other set-piece event in the Commons today was the Chancellor's spending review, which turned into a £13 billion government giveaway. Sajid Javid doled out cash to every department, declaring he was turning the page on austerity. Labour called it a piece of grubby electioneering and condemned Boris Johnson for heckling the Shadow Chancellor during his speech to the House. And no word on how those big spending plans will affect the deficit. Fatima Manji joins me from Abingdon Green. What's the Chancellor unveiled in today's spending round, Fatima?
Well, Jackie, actually took him a while to unveil anything. He spent the first 20 minutes of his statement talking about The Labour Party bashing their policies, talking about Brexit, talking about the backstop, talking about his bus driver dad. And he was actually reprimanded by the Speaker twice, who told him that he was out of order and he needed to focus his remarks on the actual spending review. Now that tells you that this is no ordinary spending statement. It's very much being seen as an election pitch by the Conservative Party and by the government. And it is quite a spending spree, the fastest spending by government in 15 years. Crucially, some of the areas that they're spending on are those that are important to Leave voters and important to those living in Labour constituencies. So perhaps it's no surprise that Labour called this a sham and grubby electioneering. But let's take a look at some of the numbers and the big winners in today's spending round. Funding for the NHS is set to go up by 3.1%. That's that crucial spending on hospitals. On schools too, that spending will be up by 3.9%. And the Home Office budget jumps up by 6.3%. Now that will cover the government's plan to recruit 20,000 extra police officers. So in fact, every department is set to get at least an increase in line with inflation. In the Chancellor's words, he said quite clearly, no department will be cut next year. That's what I mean by ending austerity. But here's the catch, because there's always a catch. Several people are pointing out that just because you're increasing spending, you're not actually reversing the cuts that have been taking place since the beginning of the coalition government in 2010. Let's just give you some examples here. The Home Office budget is still going to be 12% lower than it was in 2010. DEFRA, the Department for Food and Rural and Environment Agencies, their budget will still be 19% lower than in 2010. And spending at the Ministry of Justice is going to be 23% lower than the 2010 figure. One last very important figure, and that's more planning for Brexit, an extra £2 billion committed, bringing the total to £8.3 billion that he has planned for the Brexit preparations.
So the question is, where is all the money coming from?
Yes, key question, the money comes from more borrowing. The Chancellor says that that's okay because he believes that it falls within the previous government's fiscal rules to keep the deficit next year below 2% of national income. Now let's just remind you that Philip Hammond had kept back £26 billion of headroom for next year, what we might call a contingency fund, if you like. Now that sum was already due to be cut back by £12 billion because of a change in the way student loans are treated in the government's accounting. That would leave around £15 billion in the government's back pocket. But what we see today is that Sajid Javid has basically spent the lot. Now, he believes that that's sticking within the fiscal rules. We don't know what the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility says because they haven't actually released any documents today. But it's worth remembering that previous Chancellor George Osborne set up that office as an independent body to tell us the health of public finances because he believed, and many others agreed with him, that politicians can't be trusted to do so.
So what are the risks to this strategy from the Chancellor?
Look, politically, it may well pay off to go into all this spending. But economically, there is a problem. The deficit, we know that borrowing is already 60% higher than already. The economy is weak. We know that UK economic output shrank in the third quarter of this year. And if that continues, we'll go into a recession. Most importantly, though, we don't know what the Brexit plan looks like. And if we leave with no deal, the OBR's already suggested a no deal will hit the public finances. So the government's spending all this money without actually knowing what the economy looks like next year. Jackie.
Fatima, thanks very much. Well, go anywhere outside Westminster, and what most people want to know is how all this will affect their lives. Like, will the streets be any safer with more police on the beat? The Chancellor has promised £750 million to recruit thousands of new officers, but where will they all go? Now so many police stations have been closed, and might their resources be diverted to cope with any post-no-deal Brexit unrest? Our senior Home Affairs correspondent Simon Israel has been out with the Merseyside Police, a force cut by 25% over the last 10 years.
So you're going to be deployed to an open land search, mate, to recover weapons, firearms, drugs and things like that.
88 officers, 2.5% of Merseyside Police's total, were today deployed on an operation to, in the force's words, sustain a hostile environment for organised crime. There was nothing covert about it. Visibility, they say, on the front line translates into public reassurance. So today was about road checks, weapon sweeps, search warrants, drug fines and arrests. In the background, county lines. In the foreground, recent shootings and knife attacks. This force has suffered more than most from the cuts. In 2010, Merseyside Police had more than 4,500 officers. In 2019, a decade later, that number stands at 3,400. That's a reduction of 25%. The force's detection rate is 1 in 6 cases. Overall crime levels have barely changed in the past year. Today's search warrant, though, proved worthwhile.
Just some of the items which have been recovered from in the house. We got sort of wraps of heroin, a wrap containing what looks like heroin and crack, a mixture.
Against that background, the Chancellor, Sajid Javid, today in his spending review announced what he said was the biggest rise in the Home Office budget for 15 years.
That means £750 million to fund the first year of our plan to recruit 20,000 new police officers. With an extra £45 million this year so that recruitment can start immediately.
Merseyside's slice of that cake, like every other force, has yet to be decided.
If you can't restore the numbers to the levels they were a decade ago, how bad will that be?
It's not a question of it being bad, really. I think we're far more efficient now than we were in 2010. We've made changes at first because we had to make changes, because we didn't have the finance to police the way we did. So if I get a proportion of those officers back, I will be happy. If I get all the officers back, I'll obviously be delighted, because we can do more. Because what I've missed over the last few years is the ability to be more proactive, to put criminals on the back foot.
But Brexit is also putting the forces on the back foot. Senior officers told the Home Affairs Select Committee that access to the EU's crime intelligence data could be a tiny fraction of what it is now after leaving, and no amount of recruiting will impact on that.
Well, with me now is the Conservative MP, Sir Paul Beresford. Sir Paul Beresford, I wonder how you feel about a Tory party that now has no space for Sir Nicholas Soames, Sir Kenneth Clarke, that is withdrawing the whip from 21 Tory rebels.
We've been through it again. We went through it in Maastricht, we came out the other end, we won the elections, we're going to do it again.
So it's acceptable? You're happy with it?
No, it's not acceptable. I'm not happy with it, but we will repair the wounds and we'll come back.
But you repair the wounds with people like Sir Nicholas Soames, now no longer a Tory MP, standing down.
Well, then I don't have any difficulties with him because he's not in my team.
So that's where we are now with the Tory party. You're either on the team or you're out of the team.
We had that with John Major during Maastricht. He sacked a largest number of people, they were out of the team, we put ourselves back together and we came back.
Because the cause is greater than the individuals.
That's absolutely right. And
so all those people who feel it's very brutal, who are looking at people like Sir Nicholas Soames, Sir Kenneth Clarke, 100 years of service and devotion to the Tory party between them, gone. Good collateral damage.
No, it's not collateral damage, it's their choice. They chose it. I've spoken to some of them are friends of mine, and just asked them why. And some of them are sad that they've done it. And given a chance, I think they wouldn't have done it if they'd thought it through more carefully.
Why, in your view, is it justified? Boris Johnson talked about the fact if you don't vote, if you're voting against us, you're destroying any chance of a negotiation with the EU. That's nonsense, though, isn't it?
No, it's not nonsense, because the negotiations I know that are going on towards getting an answer, and quite a number of used experts who put things into number 10. I got a note today from one of their experts in number 10 thanking me for the stuff they put in, that they're going to use, they're going to go forward, but they can't go through it until they're ready and until they've got over this hurdle.
So you've been talking to people, you're confident the negotiations are ongoing, because there are many within your party who don't believe negotiations.
No, you don't negotiate till you've got your plans and you've got it all organised and you're ready, and they're not quite ready. They're going through a number of different scenarios and they will be discussing them, and then they will go in with the negotiations. Europe, meanwhile, is waiting to see if Boris survives this and this government survives. If it does, negotiations.
So just to clarify, as you understand it, there are no negotiations going on from the British side. We've not offered up anything in terms of a new deal on the backstop. We've not offered up any other alternatives.
I don't know if there are or aren't, but I know they're working on stuff ready to take there. And to ask now that ignores the fact that you've got to get your ammunition lined up, powder dry, then you go and negotiate.
David Gauke, who's one of the rebels who's lost the whip, says he believes the Conservative Party is in its worst crisis that he can ever remember. Many people would back him on that, wouldn't they?
He's not old enough, he doesn't remember May Street.
So you're quite happy with the run of things?
I am not happy with it at all, because we're going to have to repair, we're going to have to climb back again and win the next election.
And I just wonder, do you think it's coming from Dominic Cummings or Boris Johnson?
It's coming from the whole team there, and they're giving advice. I know some of the team really well. It's not just Cummings. There's a team, and some of that team are experts, and I'm not going to name them because they'll be picked on the way Cummings has been picked on.
Oh, you think he's being picked on?
Yes, I think he's been picked on.
Sir Paul Beresford, we have to leave it there. I'm really sorry about that, but thank you very much for talking to us. After the break, one of the most controversial figures in Number 10, and he's never been elected. We've just been talking about him. Just who is Dominic Cummings, the special aide who's been called the power behind Boris Johnson's throne? Welcome back to Westminster. Well, Tory MPs are calling him dangerous, an unelected, foul-mouthed oaf, a man who isn't even thought to belong to a political party, who's been found in contempt of Parliament and has never played by any of the rules. Yet the Prime Minister's special advisor, Dominic Cummings, is regarded by many as the real power behind the throne, the man who's driving Boris Johnson's populist politics and his risky all-or-nothing Brexit strategy too. Ed Howker has more.
You don't know what you're doing, do you? Any of you? This is embarrassing. You've committed the classic cardinal sin of any failed coup. You didn't secure the support of your military first, and you didn't seize the state broadcaster.
In turns, scornful, determined, ingenious, reckless. Earlier this year, Benedict Cumberbatch flatteringly portrayed Dominic Cummings as the mastermind of Britain's vote to leave the European Union. And the dramatics have followed Dominic Cummings into Downing Street. Today being played out live on TV.
At the heart of Number 10 is the Prime Minister's senior advisor, an unelected, foul-mouthed oaf.
Advisors advise, ministers decide. Can I ask the Prime Minister to bear that statement closely in mind in relation to his own chief advisor, Dominic Cummings?
Some credit him with the government's plans to prorogue Parliament, prioritise health and police spending, and the plan to purge Tories who object to a no-deal EU exit from the party. But tonight, citing privacy law, the Conservatives could not confirm whether Dominic Cummings is even a member himself. Last week, he was even accused of sacking and removing with armed police escort, not a member of his own staff, but one of the Chancellor's advisors.
He seems to be given free rein to manage and discipline, indeed expel somebody from Number 10 with an armed police officer without any clarity about whether that's what he has been appointed for. And I think a review is needed of what's going on here. Those special advisors who behave like this ultimately end up damaging, if not destroying, the politician that they work for.
Downing Street says there'll be no inquiry into the sacking. Besides, could the Dominic Cummings approach actually be popular? In April, independent research showed people's view about British politics was at its bleakest point in 15 years, and tellingly revealed this: a majority believe Britain needs a strong leader willing to break the rules. And more than 40% believe the country's problems could be dealt with more effectively if the government didn't have to worry so much about votes in Parliament. Mr Cummings seems to share the disdain.
Political bureaucracies tend to select for narcissists and for certain kinds of bureaucratic mentality. And look around Parliament. What are the kind of people that get ahead? They tend to be people who are glib, who enjoy public speaking, who enjoy networking. Lots of judgments are made on the basis of speeches and jokes.
A year after this speech, Dominic Cummings became campaign director of Vote Leave. And at the heart of that referendum, these ads, the public element of the campaign.
That's enough to build a new hospital every week.
But in addition, Vote Leave pushed out millions of these controversial, targeted Facebook ads. They won, of course, but faced sanction from the Electoral Commission. And last year, when he refused to appear before the fake news inquiry, Dominic Cummings was held in contempt of Parliament. Perhaps we're discovering the feeling's mutual.
Well, time now to catch up with what's been happening this evening. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, has taken to his feet. Gary, our political editor, what can you tell us?
Well, all the votes that we were expecting on the amendments didn't happen. We'll come back to that point and exactly what happened there. And Boris Johnson has rushed down here and has started the process he said he would do if that bill passed, the bill that stops him from exiting with no deal and requires him to seek an extension, a Brexit delay. He's done what he said he would do, and he's come to the House to ask for the House to support an early general election. Not so long ago, I think we can probably say, not many hours ago, he was saying it was something he didn't want. Now he's saying it is the only way. He is not going to win the vote at the end of this 90-minute debate because opposition parties are still sniffing a trap. They want to make sure that they have nailed down the idea of there being a way of stopping no deal. They want to make sure that they've nailed down the date. And there is some quite wide concern that even if they nail down the date and the no deal thing, they still don't want an election.
And very briefly, that amendment, amendment.
It looks as though it might well have been subterfuged by the government, a clever trick. People on the other side say, even though they said it was a killer amendment, maybe they can just absorb it, keep it in. It'll only mean that there'll be a vote on that Theresa May negotiation when the bill eventually, if it were to be law, comes into effect after Boris Johnson, if he did fail to get a deal, failed to get a deal. So they're saying they can live with it, but the government did pull a blinder there, really. And it is this kind of procedural game of battleships that people are playing, each side trying to outwit the other and try and game the scenarios that the other side is playing. And today, the government, with that little moment there, definitely sort of knocked out a frigate on the other side and really unnerved them.
And still more debate for the rest of the evening.
90 minutes of this, a vote at the end, but quite clear the government is not going to win. But where Labour's going to end up on an early election, big question mark. One person who's been in cross-party talks with them said the Labour Party right now is all over the place.
Gary Gibbon, thank you very much for joining us. Much more to talk about. Well, that's it from us on Channel 4, but switch over now to More 4 and our YouTube channel, where we'll be carrying on for another hour. That's it from us. On your screen now is a guide to where to find us. Lots still happening in Parliament tonight on this crucial night, so don't miss it. Thanks very much for that. Coming in at the end.
Told the EU what it is either. And at Prime Minister's question time today, as with the statement yesterday, he was unable to say whether he's even made any proposals whatsoever to the EU.
He hasn't.
And it's basically a policy that's cloaked in mystery, like the Emperor's new clothes. There really is absolutely nothing there. And the naked truth is that the reality is deeply unpalatable. A disastrous no-deal Brexit to take us into the arms of a trade deal with Donald Trump that will put America first and Britain a distant second. The Prime Minister knows there is no mandate for no deal, no majority support for it in the country, and no majority for it in this House.
Welcome back to Westminster. And we're here on More 4 and YouTube for the next hour with all the latest on this dramatic day in Parliament. In the last few minutes, the bill designed to block a no-deal Brexit on October the 31st has been passed by MPs with a majority of 28 votes. It's now set to go to the Lords. The Prime Minister has just been given his response, saying it effectively ends the negotiations with the EU.
In my view, and the view of this government, there must now be an election on Tuesday the 15th of October, and I invite the right honourable gentleman to respond, to decide which of us goes as Prime Minister to that crucial council on Thursday the 17th of October. I think it's very sad that MPs have voted like this, but if I am still Prime Minister, I do. I think it's a great dereliction of their democratic duty, Mr. Speaker.
And with me now to explain it all, our political editor, Gary Gibbon. Gary.
If only explain it all. Well, I can tell you what is happening at the moment is that the Prime Minister is trying to get an early general election, and Jeremy Corbyn has just got to his feet. He was slightly late into the chamber. Unusually, the Prime Minister started speaking. Jeremy Corbyn wasn't aware that the whole procedure beforehand had collapsed, and he came in and the Prime Minister mocked him a bit, but the Prime Minister is now truly mocking him with substance and trying to say that he's a chicken, not because he won't be voting for this early general election idea. Labour MPs have been told to abstain tonight. And of course, Jeremy Corbyn, as Boris Johnson knows well, has been calling for a general election on and off almost every day for a few years now. So what exactly is going to happen next in Labour policy? Well, they're wrestling with it. They are very, very uncomfortable about the idea of what they think could be walking into a Boris Johnson trap. Going for an early general election only to discover that they're not back in time, say, to stop a no-deal Brexit. Or maybe Boris Johnson's got a majority and himself has ripped up the bill that they're trying to put through Parliament right now. Everywhere they're looking around for traps and procedural tricks. And of course, they just got slightly tripped up by one of them, so that's only made them even more paranoid. They will not be voting for this tonight. Other parties, likewise, holding back. But quite a few people around, and I think some around the leadership of the Labour Party, chomping at the bit and thinking, how long can we sustain this, not going for an early election?
Well, the Labour leader is on his feet now. Let's have a listen to what he's going to say.
Shut down debate. We had the Prime Minister deciding to prorogue Parliament in August, and today he wants to dissolve Parliament to shut down scrutiny. He cannot handle dissent. He cannot handle dissent and debate in his own party, and has extraordinarily expelled 21 of his own MPs who voted against him last night. The hypocrisy of this process is phenomenal. From a Prime Minister who twice voted against the last Prime Minister's Brexit plans. A general election isn't a plaything for a Prime Minister to avoid his obligations, to dodge scrutiny or renege on commitments. He is committed to renegotiate Brexit, but where is it? Where is the plan? Where are the proposals? If he has a Brexit plan, be it no deal or the new mystery proposal deal that we've yet to see any information of, then he should put it before the public in a public vote, a referendum or a general election, and seek a mandate for them. Let the Prime Minister go to Brussels tomorrow and ask for an extension so that he can seek a mandate for his unknown Brexit plan and put it before the people. The truth, Mr. Speaker, is that this motion from the Prime Minister is about playing a disingenuous game that are unworthy of his office. I look forward to the day his government and his party and all their austerity and misery they've heaped on this country are turfed out of office, and we prevent this country crashing out on the 31st of October with all the damage he knows, because he's already seen the documents, it will do to people's lives and job prospects in this country. It's a cynical movement from a cynical Prime Minister.
Mr. Kenneth Clark.
I don't know the House wants to debate. Well, now, if a snap general election is called, what will Labour's position be, for example? That's one of the big questions that Gary Gibbon was posing there. Joining me now is Layla Moran, a Liberal Democrat MP who is fighting to prevent a no-deal Brexit. We're also joined by Gillian Keegan, a Conservative MP, and Caroline Flint, a Labour MP, who backed that vote on the final version of Theresa May's Brexit deal. Thank you very much for joining us, first of all. I want to start with you, Caroline Flint, because the pressure is now on Labour. I mean, what is Labour's position? Where does it go now? You've been talking about an election virtually every day for 2 years, and now you don't want one.
Well, I mean, look, at the end of the day, the Prime Minister, whichever party they represent, can get a general election if they want. But I think for me, and I'm someone who has voted for a deal, I'm against no deal, but I think the best way to do that is to leave the European Union in an orderly manner. What I am concerned about in terms of the Prime Minister's tactics is he could lead us into a situation where he calls a general election, and actually what he does is set a date, despite what he's saying tonight, for after the 31st of October, which means we will crash out in the middle of a general election campaign, and that is not acceptable.
So clearly you don't trust Boris Johnson, but I think can the voters trust Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, I think the thing is what the voters want is us to find a resolution on this matter. And as I said tonight in my contribution, I'm afraid between hardline Brexiteers and hardline Remainers, we haven't found that way through it in the House of Commons. And it's not just the government and Boris, others have to take responsibility.
So quickly, we'll come back to you all in a moment. We're going to listen to your former colleague, Ken Clarke, who's speaking in the House now.
Of a pathway to actually give us more time for grown-up, sensible, diplomatic exchanges between countries. The idea that in the European Union, they're refusing us a deal because they really think they're going to trap us in permanently is nonsense. They're desperate to get a deal, but of course they're desperate to get a deal, but not so desperate that they're going to accept terms which will cause chaos in Northern Ireland, politically and economically, and will shatter the normal rules which hold together the single market and the customs union upon which they're based. The Prime Minister has thrown down dramatic conditions which he must know make any sensible negotiations pointless unless he changes his direction. He's now Prime Minister. He's now a responsible politician with huge responsibility. I urge him one last time to stop treating all this as a game and to use the time to actually get a serious resolution of these impossible problems to look after the future goodwill of this country, keeping us in a proper, no doubt different relationship with our partners on the continent, and in particular, keeping our economic and trading relationships intact, because they're essential for the future of our children and grandchildren.
Mr. Ian Blackford. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate with all my heart the Right Honourable Member for Rushcliffe, who's, I have to say, as he has done on many occasions where I've followed with him, spoken with great sense. And I have to say to the Prime Minister, I'll give you a piece of friendly advice, Prime Minister. Sack your advisor, Dominic Cummings, and bring in the Right Honourable Member for Rushcliffe that might actually be able to give you some sensible advice. You know, Mr. Speaker, we're having this debate tonight quite simply because the Prime Minister's been defeated. That's the reality. And my question to the Prime Minister is, this House is supposed to be sovereign in his eyes. Accept the will of this House. Accept the bill that Parliament has passed. Accept your duty as Prime Minister and go to the European Council on the 17th of October and negotiate the extension that you've now been told to deliver. Mr. Speaker, yet again this government has been defeated by a majority in the House of Commons against a no-deal Brexit. The passage of the bill tonight to block no deal is a victory, not just for democracy, but yes, for common sense. And I pay tribute to the members of Parliament across these benches who've worked tirelessly to build consensus for this legislation to pass and remove the cliff edge catastrophe. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister shouldn't be talking about surrender. He should be congratulating members of Parliament that have stood up for all our national interests. And really, what a disgrace for a Prime Minister to accuse parliamentarians, decent parliamentarians, of surrender. It simply lacks dignity, Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, now Parliament has once again displayed its...
Well, Gillian Keegan, I have to ask you, what do you feel when you look at Sir Ken Clarke there, now no longer a member of the Conservatives and sitting on the
Really
Conservative...
sad. Really, really sad. I think Ken Clarke has been an excellent addition to the House for many, many years. He's the father of the House. I fully support what he says. I mean, he's voted for the deal 3 times. He's tried to do the right thing. He's tried to honour the result of the referendum. He's tried to protect, do it in an orderly way. And, he really is a fantastic colleague. And, we had a debate today, and I think there was Sir Nicholas Soames as well, and, Alistair Burt, and it actually brought tears to mine and many people's eyes.
So why aren't you joining
still
them?
Tory party members, by the way.
They
They've
are
only
still
had the whip
Conservative Party.
suspended.
Yes, they've had the whip removed, yes.
But why aren't you joining him in terms of voting against the government when you say you fully support him?
Because, we've all done the same thing in terms of supporting a deal. Unfortunately, not enough people have done that. When it comes to no deal, what I've always said to people is, there are massive consequences of no deal, and is it really worth, because 30 MPs of any colour have not backed this agreement, that we as a parliament would inflict all that damage on millions of people, on thousands of businesses? And I don't think it is, which is why many colleagues have been calling to bring an agreement back, because I think they know that we could possibly now get something through. I think timing is everything, and what they've done at the moment, I think they need to give the Prime Minister, he's a new Prime Minister, he needs to have time, and he needs to have time, till the Council of Europe at least, to see if he can get a deal.
The EU Commissioner saying there are no new suggestions being offered. Philip Lambert said today suggestions from the government that negotiations were ongoing and doing well was, frankly, if you pardon my language, BS.
Well, what's the difference between a business negotiation, which I've done loads of, and a political negotiation, is all the positioning and signalling is done via the media across the channel, across the airwaves, and therefore they wouldn't they? They always do. And actually, it is again, and of course Boris is doing the same back to them, right?
Layla Moran, you should give Boris Johnson and the government some time on this.
I don't. No, Boris Johnson is already proving to be one of the most inept prime ministers we've ever had. His very first vote in the House he has lost. I've never trusted a word that comes out of that man's mouth. And what we have to remember that we're doing here today is taking no deal off the table. He's now offering a general election, yet that Prime Minister is the one who sets the date. He says October the 14th. It already changed to 15th.
What will you achieve if this bill goes through, apart from another delay?
Well, at least it's a delay and not no deal. And we have been clear. We do want a delay, and we're upfront about it. We want a people's vote as a result of that delay.
So I'm absolutely delighted tonight that the amendment I supported alongside Stephen Kinnock and others actually was successful, because it amended the Hilary Benn bill, which means that actually instead of, as it stood in its form under Hilary Benn, that we have an extension with no purpose, we now have, you can only have the extension if you attach it to getting a deal. I personally
Did it pass by mistake, or was it a ruse on behalf of the government?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, we went forward, we did what we needted to do, and a win is a win.
But it's still has to get through the Lords.
Hang on a second.
I'll point out.
But what it showed, that unlike the unelected Lords, the elected chamber of the House of Commons has approved an amendment.
Accident.
Well,
by accident.
To be honest,
I went through that lobby as well. I went through the lobby as well with Caroline to vote for that amendment. We had a free vote.
Yeah.
The Conservatives had a free vote.
Talking about bringing back a withdrawal agreement that was
no.
rejected by the House 3 times.
No, that's not.
Well, Layla Moran thinks
Well, 3 times. And I
Layla
just
wants a
say, second referendum. She's never going to vote for anything.
That no lobby to defeat that amendment was also full.
Gillian says you're never going to vote for anything.
We will vote. We actually have said up front we will vote for the withdrawal agreement if it's put back to the people with the option to remain.
The people want this sorted, and part of the trust tonight is whether we can trust the Prime Minister, and that's where there is a test of that trust. Hang on, Jackie. I'm going to come to that. Is whether the Prime Minister can win people's trust to not just not work for a deal, but also the other side of that is many people on my side and on the Labour side have said clearly they're not prepared to vote for any deal. Now there are enough of us.
Many people will argue that Labour's position their inability to settle on a credible position is why we're in this chaos
Well,
now.
no, I think there's a lot of people we can look at who, I would say, hardline Brexiteers and hardline Remainers across the House have frustrated our efforts to respect the referendum result and get a deal. And tonight has shown that actually we were hearing more voices across the House who actually want to sort this mess out. And our amendment to the Hillary Benn thing has changed the game now. Layla's not happy about it.
Do you accept that, Layla Moran?
We'll see. Let's see if it gets through the Lords, and frankly, if it does come back, then people will potentially vote on Theresa May's deal a fourth time.
It's not Theresa
We'll have a see. We'll see. Well, let's see.
Because if it changes the game, where does that leave the Lib Dems?
I'm not sure it does change the game at all. Let's see what happens.
It could. I think there's enough people, personally. I've always felt that there's enough people, once the party political games were out of the way, and there was leadership games on our side, I'll accept that, and we have people who've never voted for it on our side, but there are enough people in the House of Commons who have read this in great detail, who have spoken to constituents, who have spoken to businesses, who would do the sensible thing. And this deal is actually one that was amended.
Who don't think it's Theresa May's withdrawal
But it isn't.
agreement.
It is
Jackie,
as amended by 10 things that was negotiated
So,
with
Jackie,
the Prime
look,
Minister.
we never got the chance to actually vote on the withdrawal agreement bill because obviously Theresa May departed, and that was, to be honest, the people responsible for that were people on the Tory side, and to be honest, people on the opposition benches, including my own party. The reason why we have Boris Johnson today is because people who want a second referendum refuse to even think about a deal. But hang on, can I just finish the point?
Sorry.
We are not saying, and it's very clear from our amendments and the notes that have gone inside it, we're not expecting that a deal will come back, will just be a replica of Theresa May. But what we do know is, and we have to be grown up about this, many of the elements that were agreed about supporting EU nationals, about some of the areas about protecting what we've already got in the environment, there is cross-party agreement. So elements of the Theresa May withdrawal agreement will form the final.
And so in the end, Boris Johnson's deal or Theresa May's deal may well get through on the back of Labour votes. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that would annihilate the Labour Party at a general election. And actually, I think more likely than not, the only thing that's going to get us out of this mess is bringing that deal, whatever it is, to the people with the option to remain. That's still going to be the only way. And you may well find, we are very clear, we want to stop Brexit, and you may well need our votes to get what you want to. So let's see where this goes.
A second referendum is a really bad idea without implementing the first, and I think both of us agree on that. It's very difficult to sell. This has been the most divisive issue across our country. It will just ignite it all again. And
I have
even
to ask
worse,
you all about the prospect of an election. Is it further away or closer now?
Oh, I think, goodness, I don't think we should rule out anything happening in the next 72 hours that will change the course of a general election. If the Prime Minister, whatever Prime Minister was, really wants one, they can find one.
Layla Moran, further or closer?
I think we're probably closer at this point, but nothing's guaranteed.
we've got a working majority of minus something now, so I think unless we can resolve that, get over Brexit and then get to policies which are much less controversial, then it could happen very quickly. We have, a working majority is not. You can't minus something.
Getting to policies that are much less controversial. But thank you very much for talking to me today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, now if a snap general election is called, then power to decide Britain's future could end up again in the hands of voters. In the battleground areas, that could be key to any outcome. What are people thinking? And will traditional political loyalty still count? We've sent Jane Deeth to Wakefield to find out if voters' views are becoming more entrenched or whether in these highly volatile times, everything is now up in the air.
The River Calder weaves through Wakefield, past old mills and modern sculptures. This is a Labour city, but it's also a Leave one. 66% here voted out of the EU. John and Janet Holmes are taking a civilised afternoon tea in despair at the revolt in Parliament. John says he's a socialist, but he doesn't rule out voting Conservative or even for the Brexit Party in an election, because politics is less important right now than the job of just leaving the EU and moving on.
We have the capabilities, or we had the capabilities, to stand on our 2 feet without support from anybody. And now it appears to have melted away. Is somebody going to do something? Or are we going to go round and round and round?
So what would you do in another general election? Would you stick with Labour or would you go?
I will look for the outcome of the potential clients for the job, shall we say.
Daniel says his family has given up on Labour because the party's just too far away from working people who want out of Europe.
If it was me, I would vote Conservative, even though I want to vote Brexit Party, because you then run the risk of splitting the Conservative Party, obviously, and then Labour getting into power. So even though I would strongly want the Brexit Party, Nigel Farage, I would vote Conservatives.
It seems the Brexit issue is cutting traditional political ties. People no longer casting themselves as left or right, but leave or remain. Steve Willis is a leaver. He'll put up with another election if it enables the Prime Minister to deliver the goods.
So nothing's going to get done unless we get a majority for one party or the other. So I believe it's the only thing to do now. I think the only thing to do is to actually get a general election.
And what if we still don't have a majority after all that?
Then we're in trouble. We're in serious trouble as a country.
Polyglobal makes moulds and plastic parts, 40% of which it exports to Germany. The business would like to remain in the EU. Diana Ulevitsiana from Lithuania wants to remain in Wakefield. She has settled status and can stay for 5 years, but still, Brexit is unsettling.
I want that England will stay in EU. I want that. I don't know what will happen next. I don't know what's happened after 5 years. That's why I'm worried.
We need to know our fate at the end of the day. We need to get on with it. And as far as I'm concerned, time is of the essence.
The boss agrees with the Prime Minister on one thing. There's been too much dither and delay. He's beginning to think no deal is doable if it means we draw a line under things sooner.
We've already had talks with overseas customers. Luckily, we're in a bit of a niche market. However, there has been talks about them reclaiming some of their own work and doing things within the EU rather than with the UK.
Not knowing what's downstream is frustrating people here. Many in Wakefield just want Westminster to make something, anything, happen.
Well, let's get the view from the opposition benches, and joining me now is the Labour MP John Healey, Shadow Secretary of State for Housing. John Healey, there are many people who might argue that if Labour had been better at getting a more concrete view on Brexit, we wouldn't be in this mess.
I'd argue that if the Tories had been better in government and had not messed this up over 3 years, had been ready to talk to Labour, and we've been willing to discuss a sensible, common sense, middle ground deal for which they could have been support in Parliament for more than a year now, then we would certainly not be here today. But we are here today, and the task
Labour's position was so unclear for so many people. That hasn't helped, has it?
No, it wasn't. It was effectively a soft Brexit based on a customs union, which largely gets over the problems of any sort of tariffs or checks and problems with trade. It largely gets over the problem of the Irish border, and it could have been the basis, and the European Union were ready to negotiate that, of a deal that could have got through Parliament. But the government were not willing to talk to Labour until after the 29th of March.
Virtually every day, someone from the Labour Party, from the Labour leadership team, saying we want a general election, and now you don't want a general election.
We certainly want a general election. We want an earliest possible general election, but we have a job to do here and now first, which is what today has been about, and that's putting a legislative lock to stop Boris Johnson crashing Britain out with no deal and no mandate behind that without a parliamentary vote, and to stop him getting round that by fixing the date of the election. We've got to get the legislation through Parliament, onto the statute book, job's then done, and we turn our attention, quite rightly, to the general election the country needs.
Your colleague just now, Caroline Flint, was telling us how delighted she was that this Stephen Kinnock amendment has passed. I mean, where, in your view, does that leave you?
Well, I think that's caught everyone's by surprise, but if you look at the amendment, it probably has no effect. What it certainly doesn't do is change the purpose of the bill, which prevents Boris Johnson, without another parliamentary vote, taking Britain out of the European Union with no deal because there is no parliamentary or public majority for that. And it also means that he can't get around it by fixing the date of the election. So that's the importance of the all-party support that we've led from the Labour front benches for that during today and, of course, last night too.
If we talk about all-party support, when the idea of an interim government was raised, Jeremy Corbyn suggesting himself as leader, I mean, that was rubbish, precisely because Jeremy Corbyn was the man suggesting he should be caretaker Prime Minister.
Well, it wasn't rubbish. It was a plan on the table. It then led to the all-party talks that Jeremy Corbyn led. It led to the all-party majority in Parliament last night that again Labour led, and I'm proud we've done that. We said in 2017 we would oppose no deal. We've led the arguments. We've led the all-party, cross-party support for that.
But you never really made it clear whether you were for Remain or Leave, and the position now, if and when we go to a general election, is still unclear.
No, our positions in 2017 has been clear. We want a good, better Brexit deal than the Tories have negotiated, that does a better job to safeguard British jobs and our rights and standards. And that's what we would have discussed with the government if they'd been willing to really reflect that mainstream opinion in the country.
So what will you put on the manifesto? Your Leave
that would have
campaign for Leave or
Remain?
Remain?
It would have respected the referendum and it would have recognised the concerns that many who voted Remain also had.
But what will you put on the manifesto? Will you campaign at that stage for Leave or Remain? That's still not clear.
We've said we'll negotiate in government on Brexit, we'll negotiate a better Brexit deal, and at the same time we'll set about the big task of trying to fix the problems that many people face day to day on the NHS, on social care, on food banks, on falling real wages, and of course on housing too.
John Healey, thank you very much for talking to us. I'm sorry that we've got to end it there for now, but after the break, will there be an election? And whatever happened to the party of Churchill and Disraeli as Boris Johnson throws out two former chancellors and a leadership candidate, what future do the Conservatives have?
But he knows that he was just saying whatever came into his head to get the job. He knows he cannot get the great deal because there is no such thing as a great Brexit deal, and he is scared of being found out. I've already given way to somebody on his benches. I'm going to say what I have to say. The way I think this is best resolved is by putting this issue to the people in a people's vote to decide on the Brexit way forward, because I do not believe there is a majority in this country for any specific type of Brexit deal. I'm not even convinced there's a majority in the Conservative Party for any type of Brexit deal. But we could have a general election, and I say to the Prime Minister, such an election should be held in a responsible, calm and orderly way, not with the threat of crashing out with no deal either during the campaign or in the immediate aftermath. So if he wants an election, extend Article 50 for the purposes of having a general election and bring it on. And if he's not prepared to do that, don't be surprised when people are not fooled by his tactics and vote against him.
Desmond Swain.
Mr. Speaker, there is one purpose in denying this motion tonight, and that is to ensure that the British people have no say whatever over what takes place at the European Council on the 17th of October. Isn't it?
Anna Soubry.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I think it's very important that in this debate we are all very mindful of the language that we use. And it has been concerning that honourable and right honourable members opposite, including our Prime Minister, has chosen to use the word frit and frightened of those of us who believe that the last thing that this country needs is a general election. Given everything that has happened in the last few years, there are a number of people in this place of whom they could not be accused of being frightened. In fact, it's taken a lot of courage for some people. And if honourable members opposite aren't familiar with courage, they might want to talk to some of those honourable members who they've just booted out of their own party. Decent, long-serving, hugely loyal members of the Conservative Party who last night and again today chose to put their constituents and their country first. And the price that they have paid is to see the end of their parliamentary career. And this House is right, Mr. Speaker, to commend each and every one of them for the considerable courage that they took. Mr. Speaker, I am in no doubt whatsoever that it's not just the people of Broxtowe, but the people of this country who are thoroughly fed up to the back teeth with Brexit. I don't doubt that. And that is why I am of the very firm view that the matter of Brexit must be brought to a conclusion. There are people in this place who will know in the many cross-party conversations that we
Welcome back to Westminster and this extended news programme on a momentous day here. Our political correspondent Paul McNamara is with me to tell us what's been happening. What has been happening, Paul?
Yeah, that's quite a good question, and a question that quite a few nervous Labour MPs are trying to find out the answer to at the moment. So it was always sort of known that this bill to block no-deal Brexit was going to get passed. There were a whole load of amendments that were being attached to it. One of them was Stephen Kinnock's amendment, whether or not to delay Theresa May's withdrawal agreement again. And the plan was, or the thought was, that it was never going to get passed. Maybe a little bit of clever politicking has gone on here. This is what everyone's trying to work out at the moment. When everyone who voted against it went in, there was no teller to count their votes. So it automatically gets put onto the bill. Everyone thought that this was a bill killer, something that no one would vote for. And the suspicion is that maybe this is a little bit of clever politicking that's gone on by Boris Johnson, possibly by Dominic Cummings, that might just prove that actually they've got a few tricks up their sleeves still. Now the debate now is, okay, so the Kinnock bill, the Kinnock amendment has been attached to it. Is it really that big a deal? Now the debate is, no, it's probably going to go to the Lords. Lords can take it out there, which is going to tonight, and hopefully it won't be that big an issue. But the point here is that actually everyone thinks they've got one up on the other, and it looks like Boris Johnson's still got a few tricks up his sleeve.
Paul McNamara, thanks very much for joining us. Thank you. Now let's go back to Matt, who's in Brussels.
Very much to hear Boris Johnson's plans for a deal on the Irish border checks after Brexit, when the two meet on Monday in Dublin. But a group of Northern Irish business leaders who've been in Brussels today aren't very positive about the progress of negotiations so far. With me now is Stephen Kelly, who's CEO of Manufacturing NI Northern Ireland, which represents 550 companies there. Thanks for coming on the programme. You represent these businesses. The situation in Westminster is as clear as mud at the moment. What would you like to see most in order to reassure your clients?
Well, here in Brussels, as well as in factories and in homes right across Northern Ireland, people are looking on in amazement about the shambles that's really unfolding in Parliament. We just want to trade, we just want to employ people, we just want to make sure people have a wage to feed their family and run their homes. But what we're witnessing is something that is an existential crisis in many respects to those firms that I represent that trade across that border and trade with the rest of the UK. So we're astonished with the political behaviours that's going on. We came to Brussels to try to find out from the horse's mouth themselves how these negotiations are going. Every door we went through, no one has seen any negotiations. None has taken place until this point.
That's what they've all been telling you?
Every person, whether it's the Article 50 team, whether it's the Directorate General in Trade, whether it's people in Parliament, embassies and envoys. No one has seen any documents, no one has seen any substantive effort in order to try to solve this problem, which is at the core of what the Brexit problem is.
So what conclusions are you drawing from that?
Well, at this point in time, all we can conclude is that this isn't actually a negotiation. This is all about a campaign in terms of Parliament to try to get some sort of parliamentary majority so that Boris Johnson or the Conservative Party can run the country. But at this point in time, we're facing a massive crisis. People are losing their jobs, people are concerned about their futures, and they're being used as pawns in a game of politics that is doing no favours for those people.
Now, Boris Johnson has said very clearly, even if there's no deal, he will not put border checks on the inner Irish border. No one wants to see those checks. No one wants to see the border return, but the European Union has also said very clearly that they cannot have a massive hole into their single market, which could then become a kind of smuggler's paradise. So what have they told you about that here, the Europeans?
Well, quite simply, it's an analysis that we have ourselves, which is the plan by the UK government is essentially to just throw open the doors in Northern Ireland for at least a period of a year. But the heat of no deal being applied to that plan will mean it will crash and burn inside a number of days,
Why?
if not a number of weeks. Quite simply, it's a wide open door for smugglers and indeed for legitimate businesses to just completely bypass any trade barriers, any costs or complexities, any tariffs that may be applied onto goods. Instead of driving them through Ireland across to Wales, just drive them north, go through on the ports that land in Scotland. That bypasses all those costs, all those complexities, and will be an open door for any smuggler and a legitimate business.
So, and if there are choke points in places like Dover and Portsmouth, do you expect the traffic into the Republic of Ireland to increase so that people can drive their things into Northern Ireland and therefore into the UK?
Well, that will be a natural outcome. If there's blockages and congestion at Calais and Dover, people will have to find another route. That route may not be for time-sensitive items, it may be for other manufactured goods. But Ireland as an island can be a land bridge from continental Europe back into the rest of the UK. And the obvious place to do that is just drive goods north, cross into Scotland, and you've got free and open access into the rest of the UK market.
But I mean, a smuggler's paradise, it sounds rather lurid, but that is not as bad an outcome as a hard border, is it not, politically?
Well, politically, it may not be a bad outcome, but it's exactly the same negative outcome for our businesses. 1 in 4 families in Northern Ireland depend upon a manufacturing wage. Those families depend on seamless trade, not just north-south, but into the rest of the UK as well. If we get that scenario, if the UK has to start to put in some checks and controls, they will go in on the Irish Sea and not on the border within Ireland.
And in one line, do you think an election in the UK will sort out this mess? Will it give some clarity, whatever the result might be?
Well, you would hope that it brings some sort of clarity. What we have at the moment is complete stasis, and that's no interest for our members at home, for the people who depend on them for their wages, and it's certainly no interest for the rest of the UK.
Stephen Kelly, thank you very much indeed. Well, there you heard it, an awful lot at stake for ordinary people, ordinary businesses all over the UK, but of course also in Northern Ireland. Jackie, back to you.
Mats, thank you very much. Well, let's get more reaction from MPs here. I'm joined by the Conservative Andrew Bridgen and Joanna Cherry from the Scottish National Party. I want to start with what should be a really, really simple question, and I'd like to get the answer from both of you, really. What has happened? Where are we this evening? Andrew Bridgen.
Well, the government has lost the votes this evening, and mysteriously an amendment was passed through which didn't have the support of the House, but no tellers were put up, so it would appear that the old withdrawal agreement will have to come back as well before the House if no other deal comes forward. That's really quite worrying. For me, we've lost our majority. What we need is a snap general election and put this back to the people, all the parties in Westminster who are convinced that they've got the public best interest and the public on board. They'll have a chance to put out their policies.
Come back to the election point in a moment. Joanna Cherry, is that the same reading you have of what's happened here today?
I suspect I've got a slightly different reading of things. What's happened here today is that Boris Johnson's administration is on the rocks. In normal times he would be resigning as Prime Minister. He's suffered a series of defeats, and what's happened is
But on that point, will the withdrawal agreement in essence have to come back to the House? It's been rejected 3 times.
It seems it may well have to do as a result of that amendment, although the legal effect of that amendment is dubious. Because it went through as a result of a procedural mistake, it's not gone through in its full form. But I don't really think that's the story of tonight. The story of tonight is that Boris Johnson has lost control of the agenda. He's trying to get it back by getting a general election on his terms, but those of us who have defeated him are united to prevent him from getting a general election on his terms.
fair point. He's lost his majority. He's seen 21 rebel MPs, including Sir Kenneth Clarke, Sir Nicholas Soames, lose the whip. He's lost control of the agenda. Joanna Cherry is right, isn't she?
Well, yes, but what you're actually seeing as well is that MPs in Parliament who've never accepted the result of the referendum, and democracy only works when the losers accept the result, they have gone against the will of the British people. We've taken no deal off the table. There could be no more renegotiation. The EU will not renegotiate with no deal off the table.
There are no negotiations.
There won't be any negotiations now.
This is a ridiculous fiction. The negotiations are over. If Boris Johnson had a proposal on the Northern Irish border, he should have put it to Europe by now. He hasn't done so because he doesn't.
I mean, do you trust Boris Johnson when he says there are negotiations ongoing and the noise is out of government that they're going well? Do you believe him?
Well, if I were the EU and you've got the British Parliament threatening to bring down the government, take no deal off the table, I wouldn't give any concessions at all. Of course, these are only sham negotiations.
I'm asking,
we needed to.
Do you believe him when he says there are negotiations? Because Joanna Cherry is not the only person to say that there aren't.
I do believe them, but we wouldn't get to the compression point where the EU would take it seriously until we were through this crisis at the moment and into November, when they're staring no deal in the face. They will come to the table with concrete proposals. That's now not going to happen.
And what you're doing as part of this opposition move is reducing the power to negotiate from the government, that's not in the national interest.
The European Union were very clear that negotiations finished some time ago. We ended up with an agreement negotiated by Boris Johnson's predecessor that Boris Johnson himself didn't feel able to support until the 11th hour. But I want to correct something that Andrew said. Tonight was not about ignoring the vote to leave in England and Wales. Tonight was about protecting all the nations of these islands, and I include in that Ireland, from the disastrous economic consequences of no deal. Sure, Scotland voted to remain. Sure, we will eventually get to exercise our democratic mandate on that. But this wasn't about frustrating the outcome of the referendum. This was about stopping no deal.
Well, the SNP, they always claim to want referendums. They love referendums, but they never like the results of referendums, whether they're on Scottish independence or leaving the European Union.
Are we closer or further away from your hope for a general election tonight?
I'm absolutely convinced that Jeremy Corbyn, who's been calling for a general election every day for 2 years, is going to come under huge pressure for his hypocrisy, and I think we'll have a general election sorted by very early next week.
Early next week, are you ready, Joanna Cherry?
Yeah, but I mean, it's not hypocrisy. We are preventing Boris Johnson from turning the tables on us. We want to get this bill through first, get it through the Lords and get royal assent. Then we'll go for a general election. Boris Johnson will be defeated in Scotland.
And in the Conservative manifesto, it will say that we'll get rid and revoke this surrender bill.
To both of you, we've more to talk about, but thank you very much for now. Thank you so much. After the break, Boris Johnson says there is only one way forward for the country, but does anyone know what it is? This is one of those days when fact is definitely stranger than fiction. We'll be looking back at yet another dramatic day.
Isn't the truth that both her and many of her colleagues don't want a general election because they're as scared as we are of the leader of the opposition becoming Prime Minister?
I'm more than happy. Let's make no bones about the fact that I am not able to be completely critical when I think things are wrong, both in my party and in your the governing party. It's just a shame that quite a lot of the people who are sat in front of me, who know what has happened over the last 2 days is wrong, are too cowardly to actually say to me in here, in public, what they're all saying in the tea rooms. You know what has happened over here. It's as if we were kicking out Harriet Harman. That is what it feels like. It is an abomination the way your party has behaved. Absolutely. And you've all crowed and given sympathy to me about the problems that we have in the Labour Party, and you've just sat by silently while your colleagues have been marched out.
You're giving way. Very well. Yes. Indeed.
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. And the point she makes about the fact that how the party on that side has treated its very loyal members of Parliament, whatever else might have said, I think it's unheard of in parliamentary history that an MP who's voted against his party to have the whip suspended. That is a bully boy tactic.
I'm going to round up my comments. I agree entirely. I'm going to speak for Brenda in Bristol, although there's plenty of Brendas in Birmingham. And I'm going to speak for Brenda in Bristol, and the reason that I don't think that we should have a general election and the reason I won't vote for it is because I think, actually, we shouldn't go on conference recess. We shouldn't be proroguing Parliament. We are currently in a national crisis. This is not a game. This is not some toy that we can play with. The British public think that we should... I'm not going to give way anymore. I apologise. I have given way plenty of time. The British public, if you were to go out into the street and ask them, they think that we should be in here doing our jobs. They think that we're away from here too often anyway. I am appalled by the prorogation, and from now on, let's call it shutting down of Parliament, because I literally hate the word prorogation, and the people outside probably don't understand what we're talking about half the time. The shutting down of Parliament has essentially killed a bill that I have worked on for 2.5 years, something that people in this House have deeply held feelings on, and I'm meant to believe that the Prime Minister is really doing this because he has a vision for the people in this country. He has a vision that comes to him every night, and it is his own face. I will vote against an election until the end of October, until this is sorted, because the British public want me here working for them, and that is what I will do.
Nigel Evans. Speaker, well, no doubt her constituents do want her working here and representing her. And she talked about this being a national crisis, and it is a national crisis, but it's a crisis of trust. It's a crisis of trust in politicians. It's a crisis of trust in democracy as well, because it was this House that decided to give the British public the referendum in 2016, and I know the expectation was that the British public would not vote to leave the European Union, but when they listened to all the arguments, they decided that they wished to leave. Following that, we had a general election. The Labour Party and the Conservative Party both stood on a similar platform on Brexit, and that was that we were going to deliver the Brexit that people voted for. Now, I remember the ballot paper. It said, do you want to remain or leave the European Union? It was a basic binary question. And the fact is that 17.4 million people in this country decided that they wished to leave the European Union, and the margin was about 1.4 million. And the expectation, because of that pamphlet that David Cameron ensured got sent to all the households in the United Kingdom, and on the back of it, it said that we will deliver what the British people had voted for. That was in 2016. Today, we are September 2019. We should have left on March the 29th, but we didn't. Then we should have left on February the 12th, but we didn't. Then the then Prime Minister said, I cannot contemplate a date beyond June the 30th.
Welcome back. And as expected, the bill to block a no-deal Brexit went through the Commons tonight, but there was an unexpected amendment, and Boris Johnson reaffirmed that he wants a general election on October the 15th. All that follows a day when the Prime Minister uttered a four-letter word, got reprimanded by the Speaker, and MPs applauded a Labour member who branded Mr Johnson a racist. That snatched photo of a reclining Jacob Rees-Mogg went viral. Here are just some of the images of the last 2 days. You honestly couldn't make it up.
Now, there's been a lot of talk about democracy tonight, and the Leader of the House, who I have to say, with his body language throughout this evening, has been so contemptuous of this House and of the people. And for the benefit of Hansard, the Leader of the House has been spread across around 3 seats, lying out as if that was something very boring for him to listen to.
Order, I say to the Chancellor of the Duchy that when he turns up at our children's school as a parent, he's a very well-behaved fellow. He wouldn't dare behave like that in front of Colin Hall, and neither would I. Be a good boy!
But there's only one
chlorinated chicken that I can see in this House, and he's on that bench.
He's desperate, absolutely desperate, to avoid scrutiny.
The Shadow Education Secretary says that their economic policy is, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, by your leave, shit or bust. I say it's both this government or that Labour Party led by Jeremy Corbyn.
We don't name people in the chamber. People must observe the rules. No, order! Order! Order, I am simply and politely informing the Prime Minister of the very long-established procedure with which everybody, including the Prime Minister, must comply.
For those of us who, from a young age, have had to endure and face up to being called names such as Towelhead or Taliban, or coming from Bongo land, we can appreciate full well the hurt and pain felt by already vulnerable Muslim women when they are described as looking like bank robbers and letterboxes. So rather than hide behind sham and whitewash investigations, when will the Prime Minister finally apologise for his derogatory and racist remarks?
The opening remarks of the Chancellor were frankly out of order. I mean, that is the reality of the matter.
Whole sectors of the economy.
Order! It really is very, very unseemly. I say what I say with a heavy heart and not without reflection. There is a procedure to statements of this kind.
Act like a Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I believe the honourable member for Uxbridge is shouting at me. Last time he was shouting at someone, they had to call the police. So I don't think we need to go as far as that.
I want to make clear that I have always believed that the referendum result must be honoured, and indeed I voted for the withdrawal agreement on every occasion it has been presented to the House, which is more than can be said for my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, the Leader of the House and other members of the Cabinet whose serial disloyalty has been such an inspiration to so many of us. Mr. Speaker, I think history...
Well, Matt is in Brussels. Matt, how on earth to sum up a day like today, and what happens next?
I raised the question, which I wouldn't normally share, but it's already out.
Well, it's interesting, actually, Jackie, because it's not just us listening to these clips from Parliament, but just about everyone you meet in the city has been switching on to their television screens to see what the events in London really are. And there used to be a respect here for the kind of mother of all parliaments and its customs and its funny habits and its wigs and its cloaks. And this, behind the theatre, there was that feeling that actually everything will be all right on the night. That has gone now. There's a real sense that Parliament has become unhinged, that British politics has become unhinged, and that people here are going to be collateral damage for something that is ultimately an English, above all English, psychodrama. And at the same time, you've got the procedure, the process going on. So there are these technical talks going on between the UK and the EU, and they're about sort of the nitty-gritty of alternative arrangements. Nothing particularly convincing on the table. There's nothing particularly convincing in terms of the bigger picture, and of course we might have a general election, so they really feel here as if they are hostage to a fortune being made in London. Jackie.
Matt Fry, thanks very much. Well, that's all from this especially extended Channel 4 News. We're back tomorrow at the usual time of 7 from all the team in Westminster and Brussels. Have a very good evening.